הנה מה טוב ומנועים שבשחים גם יוחד הנה מה טוב ומנועים שבשחים גם יוחד.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. As we think about Shavuot, the holiday where we celebrate receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, we're focusing on Torah giants, people who have shaped the way we think about Torah. And certainly one of the most influential people of the past century in that area is Dr. Professor Nehama Leibowitz. Nehama Leibowitz was one of the most influential scholars and commentators on the Torah, our Hebrew Bible. She was an educator who changed the face of Bible study forever. Her influence is felt in almost any modern Bible commentary you read or Bible class you take or sermon a rabbi delivers based on the Torah portion. I remember my year in Israel, someone saying to me I had to pick up this book, which I still have and carry with me, which is her studies in, they're each called different books of the Torah, but studies in Genesis, studies in Exodus, studies in Leviticus. I was reading Leviticus this week. These books are amazing. They really shape the way you think about it. It's when you read it, you realize how many modern scholars kind of come from her way of approaching Torah, that you take it for granted, but really this is where it started. She lived from 1905 to 1997, and if you were to visit her tombstone, at her request you would see it says Nehama Leibowitz, teacher. That's it. And so to learn more about Nehama Leibowitz, my guest today, to explore Nehama Leibowitz's ideas, influence, and legacy, is Professor Smadar Rosensweig. She is a world-renowned Jewish educator and lecturer in Tanakh, the Jewish Bible. She lectures extensively throughout the United States and internationally. She serves as the Clinical Associate Professor of Bible and Judaic Studies at Stern College for Women at Yeshiva University. And she is a lecturer in the Graduate Program for Advanced Torah Studies, GPATS, at Stern College for Women, Yeshiva University as well. She is also part of a family filled with people who have influenced and continue to influence the Jewish community and beyond, including her father, David Eliach, from the Yeshiva of Flatbush, and her mother, Yafa Eliach, the famous Holocaust survivor, historian, and author. In what always feels like a wink from the heavens, this week, Professor Rosensweig and I discovered that her mother, Yafa, and my grandfather, Murray Pantier, served on the U.S. Holocaust Commission created by President Jimmy Carter, the commission that was responsible for the creation of the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Smadar, it's such a privilege to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, so let's start with you, because I want our viewers to get to know you before we get to know Nehama Leibowitz. Tell us a little bit about yourself, the journey that brings you here to this table today.
So it really starts when I was a little girl, because my parents really always highlighted learning, and especially biblical learning. Even when I was in elementary school, I took it very seriously, and I competed in the International Bible Contest in the elementary school and high school, and I also traveled to Israel to compete, and they always have it on Yom Ha'atzmaut, on Israel Independence Day.
Great. Wait, tell us just a set in for people who aren't familiar with that. So there's a competition where it's basically trivia about elements of the Jewish Bible? So
it's not only trivia, but it's really to know all the details and to know the big themes, and you're tested in many different tests, until you finally, get to the final televised competition in Jerusalem on Israel Independence Day.
What age were you for this?
What?
How old were you when this happened?
So I was in 8th grade and also in 10th grade.
Wow, okay. And when you say your parents stressed that, they taught you, or they were like, this is important, go learn with your teachers?
So both, which was very important, which means on the one hand, of course, I learned from my teachers in school, but even more so, I learned from my parents. We took time every single week to learn together. And some of the books were pretty difficult because at my age, I didn't really have contact with them yet. It was a great opportunity, in addition to school, to really, learn with my parents on a regular basis.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, keep going.
So, how did I get to Nehama Leibowitz?
Yeah.
So
let's back up a little bit though.
Yes.
So 8th grade and 10th grade, you're intensely into Bible. You're already encountering her at that age, or more things happen?
So already in 10th grade, my parents introduced me to the studies of Nehama Leibowitz.
Wow.
To get a sense of what she does. And what's fascinating is that both my parents had interactions with her, which means my father was a teacher in Israel before he came to America. He was an educator, and he taught in the Bnei Akiva movement as a counselor, but he also was a principal in an elementary school called Motza and a principal in a school called Kfar Batya. But both of these were youth villages. And Nehama Leibowitz was very involved in the education of all these immigrants that were coming in, or orphaned students. And these were dorm schools. And as a result, my father would give classes. Nehama Leibowitz and some of the other old German educators would come and assess his classes. So he had an ongoing relationship with her, especially his main mentor, Chaim Tzvi Enoch, was very close with Nehama Leibowitz, and they had similar teaching styles. So this was something that really influenced my father as an educator.
Wow, beautiful. Okay, and also what about your mother? What was her relationship with Nehama Leibowitz?
So she used to answer the sheets. So Nechama, we're going to talk about it in a few minutes. She used to write question sheets.
Nehama Leibowitz did.
Nehama Leibowitz wrote question sheets on the Bible. That was really one of her ways of popularizing Bible study. And she would have these question sheets that she would write, and they would go out to her students, but also to the general public. And she did this on her own time because her students asked, we're not in class anymore. Now we were in your class, we're going back to our kibbutzim, we're going back to our little villages, and we need to continue our education, even though we can't be in class. So she would put together these question sheets. And my mother was a good student, and she said, I want to answer these question sheets as well. So she would have, in that sense, a correspondence with Nechama, as everyone called her. She was very modest.
Great. Wait, so let me just clarify a couple of things. Your mother had her as a teacher previously, or she just kind of heard that students were getting these questions and signed up?
Yes, so my mother never had her as a teacher, but she took her question sheets in every week because she would do it on the weekly portion. That's what Nehama Leibowitz did. So my mother had access to these questions, and she answered them, and Nechama would mark every single one individually and send them back, not only with checks and X's, but also with personal comments.
That's insane. So let me just get the picture here. So basically, this is obviously well before email. We're talking about snail mail, and a teacher is creating question sheets about each week's Torah portion on a weekly basis, sending it out to her list of students. Those students are receiving them, filling them out, sending them back to her, and then she's filling them out and writing comments and sending them back out to them.
Yes.
That is impossible to imagine. That's dedication to being a teacher.
Right.
Wow. And then I saw you also kind of mentioned in there a few different places where people had her as students. So was she focused on a specific community or multiple communities? Where did she draw her students from?
So when Nehama Leibowitz came to Israel, so she comes in 1930, and she is super educated, right? She went to the university at Marburg. She wrote a PhD on English literature, German literature, linguistics, and then she really wrote specifically on the translations to the Song of Songs, to Shir HaShirim, in the Bible. And she started out actually in Latvia when she was younger, and then the family moved to Berlin because they wanted to have a much better education for the kids. So you go to Berlin.
Yes, the Mecca.
And yes, the Mecca. And her father was very interested in educating his two kids. She has an older brother, Yeshiva Leibowitz, and
famous
herself.
Philosopher.
Very famous philosopher. And then Nehama Leibowitz. So they were 2 years apart, but her father really took her education very seriously. So he would educate both Yeshayahu and Nechama in the same way, which means he would teach them Bible, he would teach them Rashi, one of the most important commentators, and he would have them fill out sheets and give them quizzes. And that really encouraged her to want to teach. So she takes all this education that she has from home, then what she has in Berlin, and when she comes to Israel, they don't have the big universities, or they do, but she wasn't qualified enough to teach in universities, so she becomes a teacher in what we would call today kind of like a high school.
Got away and on that question, so I've heard a theme now of parents teaching their kids a lot of Torah, yourself included. I'm a parent always looking to teach my kids. What's the secret sauce there? Is it, I've heard, preparing for a Gilyonot Tanakh for like a contest, it sounds like her father really like taught her through quizzing her. Is that so? Is it sitting? I mean, I have friends in Israel who I feel like sit with their children on Shabbat and they read through the Torah portion, but it sounds like that there's something about rigorous study and rigorous testing around it that like gets people to learn. You're an educator. What's your hot take on how we teach our kids Torah outside of school?
Yeah, so we don't do the quizzing method. We really just learn with them and analyze with them and have them ask a lot of questions and just to give them the love of Torah and what do the words mean and how does it relate to you. You just see throughout the years different styles of also, parent-child relationships and education. But I guess each generation, whatever works.
Right. You could be a little bit harder depending on the time you live. Okay, fine. Great. Okay, so she gets to Israel. She's not going to teach at a university in Israel, so she becomes a teacher. And you mentioned kibbutzes, you mentioned kfars. Like, is she running around town? Like, what's the story here?
Okay, so when she starts out, she teaches in like a teacher's seminary.
Okay.
And she teaches almost everything. She has to teach English, she has to teach literature, she teaches a little Bible.
Okay.
So history, she really is a teacher, jack of all trades. She's really very knowledgeable. And they really need a lot of teachers. How many teachers do they have in the 30s?
Right. And she's teaching teachers. That's what.
She's teaching high school. In those days, already, if you went to school past the age of 15, you were considered an educated individual, and you were, an intellectual, as opposed to going out, to work or doing something vocationally.
Got it. Okay.
So she's teaching counselors and youth movements, and she's really part of the Youth Aliyah framework.
Okay.
And just to step back a little, Nechama was an ardent Zionist.
Okay.
She loved Israel. Right after she got her PhD in Germany, and the day after she gets married, she marries her uncle, who is 31 years older than she is.
Wow.
And she's 25. That she graduates, they get on a boat, and they come to Israel. And he is a little infirm. He becomes progressively blind, and she's the one who has to go out to work.
Got it.
So she is really not only, a part-time teacher, she is a full-time teacher. So she's one of the few full-time women who are teaching in this program.
Right.
And also she's incredibly educated.
Right.
Because she went to the Gymnasia, the special high school in Berlin. She got a PhD, but she also went to what's called the Hochschule der Wissenschaft des Judentums in Berlin, which means...
Yeah, please.
Which means the Advanced Academy for Scholarly Jewish Education and Studies.
Wow.
So she's there with all the German greats who are learning in this institute.
Wow. Wait, so then how come she couldn't be a professor in Israel?
Because the Hebrew University had very few slots, and it was very difficult to get in.
Got it.
My father, who also went to the boys' Seminar Lemorim Mizrahi, to the boys' section of what Nechama taught in, and he says all of his teachers eventually became great professors.
Wow.
Because there were so few universities, so you really had to teach high school, and in Israel, especially if you taught in a teacher seminary high school, so you were already getting students who were motivated.
Right.
And so she's teaching in a teacher seminary.
And the type of people who are doing that, they're really teachers at heart, I assume.
Yes.
Because you're saying, like, listen, I can't do the professor thing when I come to Israel, but I'm going to teach high school kids instead.
Yes.
Amazing. Okay.
You have to love it and be dedicated.
Exactly. And they're pretty lucky, all these students, that they had these top-of-the-line professors that should have been, professors in Berlin, but then have a slot in Hebrew.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So she really dedicates herself, but she really expects excellence. And she is a very rigorous teacher.
She got that from her father, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
But also a love for the material. And she was able to mix. I actually took her, I should mention that.
Oh, wow.
When I was in Israel in 79, 80, she gave many public lectures, but also adult ed classes, because by that time I went for a year to study after high school, so I'm not in any framework. You know, I'm studying, but not in her framework.
Right. She was still working with high school kids then, but she also had these other classes.
No, by then we'll have to.
We'll get there.
Yes,
Okay,
we just didn't want to do linear,
fine.
history.
Sure.
So
you would learn with her like it was like a certain night of the week or something they had.
Exactly. So she had a class for these, adult women.
Okay.
That's the class that I joined. And even then, all those years later, for adult women, you had to, answer a question. Everyone had to have, of course, a Tanakh and a piece of paper next to them, and she would ask a question, and you had to write it down, and she would walk around, and she did this since the beginning of time.
Wow.
Meaning people who had her in the early seminaries.
Yeah.
And she would look around and see what you wrote, and she would say, "Oh, very good," and other, "Oh, terrible. How would you think of something like that?"
Wow, God. And the type of questions, these are factual questions, or I assume they're not opinion questions. These aren't like, what's your take on why blah, blah, blah happened? It's more,
you know what?
Who was
we'll
so-and-so?
talk
Yeah.
about it.
Okay.
That was one of her strengths.
Okay.
She didn't just want you to do spit back.
Okay, good, interesting.
She wanted you to think.
Okay.
Okay, you're reading this. What does it mean? So that was one of her really hallmarks when she was teaching in the seminary, when she just started, was to take these students and to say, look, we're not doing spit back. I'm going to give you text, I'm going to give you commentaries, and you have to really think of what they're saying, why they're saying, how they're saying.
Sure.
And
Wow.
one of the first things that she started, you might remember from elementary school, I for sure remember, even in high school, she started the phrase, ma kashe l'Rashi.
What's bothering Rashi?
Exactly.
Wow.
Meaning
Crazy.
not
No
only
way.
to tell me what Rashi says,
Yeah.
and of course, so many
Right.
scholars.
Well, let's break that down for a second
Yes.
for people who aren't familiar, right? So Rashi's the French medieval commentary
Yes.
on the Bible, where he kind of, the most famous, let's say, and then the question behind it, if you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is that if Rashi chooses to comment on something must be bothering Rashi. So even though Rashi doesn't state the question that Rashi's answering, can we zoom out for a second and say what's bothering Rashi and then understand? That's amazing. Wow, okay, beautiful. So that's from her.
That's from her.
Got it.
So one of her great contributions, we're going to go through a few, but was the idea that you have to think deeply. You have to think deeply about the text itself. What is the Torah teaching you? You have to think deeply about how you relate to it. That was very important for her. What lessons are you getting out of it? But not only your own ideas, but to also know, what did some of the greats say before you?
Right.
She felt that was very important. And I think that also was a big influence from her background, which means, of course, you can have creative ideas, and what you say is very important, but know that you come from a bigger tradition. Know that people talked about this before you.
Right. I think there's like the volume called Torat Chaim or like Mikra Okadolot. Those are two different volumes that kind of have like the Torah original text there, and then they're surrounded by all the different commentaries. So she was, I don't know, that was her style basically, which is like you should know what everyone else around it is saying. And when I pick up this book, I was reading it this week for the parsha here. You see, she's almost like stitching it all together, right? She's exploring a question, and she's pulling from this, and this Italian person said this, and Rashi said this, and all these different things. She's bringing them all together, and you're saying, kind of, she's encouraging students to be familiar with the text, be familiar with the commentators, each of them, and then also, what do you think about this? But not in a like go off the deep end way, but in the context of the conversation.
Yes.
Okay.
And she also wanted you to understand the text, but also the context. So she was very much into the story itself, the words themselves, but also what does it mean? And she had two different avenues. One was the psychological avenue, which she thought was very important. These are our heroes, right? Whether it's Abraham or Isaac or Yaakov, or you go to Moses and Aaron or the women,
Right.
and what lessons can they teach you? How can we learn from their successes, but also mistakes? She was very interested in also revering these individuals, but also seeing them as role models, but also as people that you can learn lessons from them.
And again, this is one of those things that if you picked up a modern Bible commentary today that's written, in the last 50 years, you would see a lot of what you're describing. But what you're sharing with us is that she was really the first person to really be pushing that way of approaching them, right? It wasn't there wasn't that I don't want to say obsession, but that deep interest, let's say, in looking at those characters in those way. It's also, I mean, let's even zoom out further, I guess. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but my understanding is that certainly like where a lot of emphasis was at the time that she was coming up was a Talmud study, right? Going very deep in Talmud and Yeshiva, or on the academic side, like biblical criticism, like, well, how does this match up with what was going on in history and what's the geography and the archaeology? And she's coming along and saying like, no, there's a story here. There's people here, and we have to like get, to use your words, the psychology. What's going on? How come this person is silent at this moment, and how come, what's the character arc of Joseph? Let's say, right? Like, how does he change over his story? Those kind of questions.
Right. So there was a lot of new criticism, new literary criticism that, let's say, Martin Buber and others were just really developing at that time, and she said we could do that within a religious framework.
Oh, that's interesting. Also, you're saying, right, so she's bringing the kind of the traditional, we have all these commentators in the Torah, and we also have, in the academic world, literary criticism, and she's bringing both of those in together.
Right. But she was very much against high biblical criticism.
What does that mean?
That means that individuals who said, the Torah is not written by God, or you have many different authors. She very much wanted to be seen holistically and within a religious context,
right.
But also even within that context, there's so much to say about why this is written here, how it is written, what message is it giving us. So she really opens up the traditional way of studying the Bible, introducing other elements, but really also making boundaries of what she thought. So she really threads the needle, and it's very difficult because on the one hand she wants to open up to a lot of interesting things that are going on in biblical study, but she also wants to stay very religiously grounded.
Right. So then I'll ask you, as a fellow educator, and I don't know if you have this answer on one foot, but like if you were to try to describe what her goal was as an educator, right? So there's two parts here. One is like how she's understanding and reading the Bible itself. The other is, we've talked about this, that it's in the context of her doing all this educating. Yes. When you think back on her starting with the high school students, and you'll tell us more about the trajectory, and eventually having you, like many years later, what's she going for? Like what she's trying to give over? Like what's the core of it?
She wants to show that the Torah is a living, breathing organ that teaches you about life and how to be a moral person, how to be an ethical person, how to make the right choices, how to really behave in, let's say, difficult situations, to love the Jewish people, to love Hebrew, to love Israel. I mean, she was very goal-oriented in her classes.
As all the best educators are, right?
Yes.
If I had to sum that up, it sounds like what you're saying is like the Torah is about human nature, almost in some ways, that there's something there, or like, the Jewish take on human nature, something along those lines. But that it's not, even I mentioned Talmud before, there are some that could look at the Torah and just say like, each portion, what are the laws that we get this week? What are the laws that we've derived from this week's portion? Let's write those down and move on. And she's saying, no, there are all these questions about human nature and how we interact in our relationships and how we live our lives that can be called beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. And also she wanted it to be relevant, which means don't read it and think this only happened years ago.
Right.
In the end of all of her iyunim that she does, when she wrote the final work, let's just step back a bit.
What are we talking about?
So, no, this is a perfect time to put it in.
Great.
She got a request, right, to write these Gilyonot, to write the sheets. And as we said, the sheets went out to everybody. This is going on in the early 40s.
Okay.
And in 1956, she wins, as best educator. She gets this wonderful prize.
Cool.
And a lot of people are saying, okay, those of us who didn't have the privilege of having Nehama Leibowitz or of having access to the sheets, and Chaim Chamiel, who was, again, my father was friendly with all of the students of Nechama. It's a small crowd. So one of his friends in the Jewish agency said, we have to publish your works. So they publish her work. So for the first book of Genesis...
It was the Jewish agency who did it.
Yes.
Right? What's the Jewish agency?
So the Jewish agency is one of the biggest agencies in Israel that mostly works with the diaspora.
Right.
And what's fascinating about Nechama is that she loved Israel so much. She only went back the next year after she moved in 1930. So she goes in 1931 to get her parents from Europe, Berlin, to come. And that's how she survived. And her parents survived. And she loves Israel, she loves the Jewish language, but she would never come out of Israel. So she didn't come to the States, and everyone in the States wanted to learn her material. Not everyone could fly, especially in the 60s. It wasn't done on a regular basis.
Sure.
So it was actually the Jewish Agency for the Diaspora Education that said, okay, we have to publish your works. It's not fair that only people who have access to you or access to the sheets should really learn from you.
We have a national resource we need to export.
Exactly.
Wow.
So ironically, it's for the diaspora education that they were sponsoring,
publication of that.
Yes.
Okay, so what was it?
So the first one was just her sheets.
Okay.
But when she does for Exodus and for Leviticus, for Shemot and Vayikra, she writes more than just the questions and to look for the answers. She, in the end, also gives like a whole wrap-up of what her goals are.
Got it. Wow.
And there you really see, so she wants it to be relevant. And remember, this is the early 60s. The Holocaust is a very big issue. Mm-hmm. And the Eichmann trial just took place.
Sure.
And there's so many survivors. And there's so much interest in Bible studies. And, what does this all mean? And you see in the end of many of her iyunim, she actually gives a lesson. She's very open about it. Originally, she just left it to the reader. And she said, I always want to leave it open-ended. I don't want to be pedantic in that way. Right. The whole point of my teaching was read the text, see what it means to you.
Sure.
But everyone said, listen, people need more guidance. Mm-hmm. And you're not only teaching teachers now, people in general want to have access and learn the lessons.
Wow.
So she said, okay, that's not my ideal, but I'm going to put it in. And in many of these iyunim, you really see, she brings it and builds it so beautifully with questions and answers and different views. And then in the end, she wants you to walk away with a moral lesson or a lesson about ethics or about religion or relationship to God and spirituality.
Beautiful. So two things. One is, I just want to translate the word, you've used the word iyunim a couple times. That's the name of
studies.
Studies, right. And that's why if you look at it, it's called, like studies in Vayikra, Leviticus, that kind of thing. Or this is called new studies, that's another note for another time. But studies, so they're her studies on them. And then the second thing I just want to reflect is that what you just described feels like a Sabbath sermon a little bit also, right? This idea, which maybe we've become so accustomed to now, but maybe it was much less common then, which is, a rabbi would speak from the pulpit, look at that week's Torah portion, go through it, ask questions, see what everyone said about that question, and then, tie it with a bow by saying, and here's the moral takeaway. And you're saying like she was really modeling that early, or they were pushing her to do that.
She was modeling that because she felt she liked that idea of coming up with an idea. But whereas people, as you mentioned, were doing really in-depth, let's say, Talmud studies and seeing all the different views, and then coming up with an idea. So she said we could do that with Torah in a very, very intense way to see different commentaries and different views. And not only limit it to Talmud studies, but also biblical studies could be done in an in-depth way. So she was influenced by the rabbis, meaning we have to understand that on one hand, Nechama is doing something that has been done for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, she's really packaging it and she is giving a different spin to it. Right. So it is something new. And that's what's so beautiful about her. On the one hand, she is gleaning from the past, from such a long tradition, but she's making it relevant and she is really making sure that we can access it today and relate to it.
And is her kind of, I was going to use the word chidush, is her innovation that she's applying like a Talmud methodology to Bible? Is that what it feels like?
So or a little.
What would you say it is?
I would say she's mixing, because she didn't really study Talmud, but the idea that you do a rigorous study is something that I think she is mixing from traditional Bible study, but also what you get when you do a lot of research in an academic setting. Right. And I think that was the beautiful mix that she was doing.
God, and that we see, like, we were talking before about the Gush, like Rabbi Avram Lichtenstein. Do you see these examples of people who were able to pull from academic methodologies and Torah rigor and bring them together. Beautiful. And so that feels like an area for you where she really innovated also.
Yes. And what we see today is a very interesting tension. On the one hand, we see a tension with individuals who said, oh, she's looking too much to the commentators. Let's just go back to the text.
Right.
Meaning we're getting distracted. And others, many of her students, became great scholars on the commentators themselves.
Got it.
Like experts on Rashi. She really had so many students who did amazing scholarly work in the universities about Rashi and about all the different commentators. So she really influenced all the different schools. Most of them had her or had one of her students. So she really touches so many lives.
Wow, interesting. Okay, fine. That's and was there any push? Like, was there any controversy around this? Was there any pushback? Were people like, why this? Or she was open arms?
Okay, so on the one hand, she was one of the most accepted scholars.
Wow.
The fact that she was a woman is amazing. She opened the door that it's accepted that a woman is a Torah scholar. Before her time, you really did not have many. So she really opened the door because she was so modest. She did not want to be involved in any controversy. Everyone was pulling her to join their group, and she said, I don't join isms. She did not want to be politicized.
Right.
She said, I'm teaching Torah.
Right.
I want the Torah, the words to speak for themselves. And she really was able to do that. And she dressed in the most modest way. I always remember her either in her blue or her brown suit with her white shirt and a little beret.
Right. The picture's always the
and
beret.
The pictures are accurate because that's the way she always...
She always has a beret. Not because she was a revolutionary.
No, because this was her modesty.
Right.
And she was determined, but she spoke in, a very, soft voice. But, she was really a personality. When you met her, you felt her energy.
Right.
She was really a powerhouse.
Wow. But she was not large in stature, correct?
No, very, very short, but she was really such a powerful individual who exuded, intelligence and force.
Wow. Beautiful. Okay, fine. So teach me, or if you're ready, let's teach us. Yeah, teach me, as I like to say, teach me some Torah.
Yes.
Let's learn a little bit. It would be a shame to talk about her and not learn from her. So share a little bit.
So we'll do so. Yeah, I just want to mention that after teaching high school, she was in Tel Aviv University for many years.
Okay.
And also in the Hebrew University for many years. And it was a highlight for many individuals to come and learn with her.
Right.
And even till the end of her life, she taught in the Herzog Institute next to Yeshivat Har Etzion.
Right.
In Gush Etzion.
Wow.
And she also taught in the Grus Center, the YU Center in Israel. So she really worked practically till her last day.
Wow. Wow.
And she passed away at 92.
Got it.
And she worked for many years. So let's talk a little about her.
Sure. And just to put an epitaph on what you just said, it seems certainly that her influence continues to be everywhere. I mean, any Bible book you pick up is quoting her somewhere, if it's some modern commentary on Torah.
Right,
she's there.
or
and the whole
is
methodology.
Influenced.
Right. She's in the. It's. I feel like she's so in the water you don't even realize it anymore. I think when you go and look at this, I'm like, oh, they all look. All the Bible commentaries look this way now, but like. It's because she did that, right? It's that vibe. You were going to say.
Yes, I want to say thank you for having this program because everyone has been influenced by her so much that people don't feel they have to quote her anymore because she quotes everyone else. Like, oh, I'm not quoting Nechama. I'm quoting the Rambam or the commentators that she's...
And who brought the Rambam? She did.
Exactly.
She put it on a platter for everyone.
Exactly. She put it on the platter. She organized it. She developed this methodology that everyone is using.
Right.
So it's important that we give her credit. And I teach a course in Stern College teaching her studies and analyzing them because I feel people don't give her enough credit anymore.
Right.
And people don't know who she is.
Right.
But she really spawned all this education, not only for women, but also especially for women. Now you have thousands of women educators.
Right.
In her time, there was a handful.
Right. Wow.
So I'm happy that we are giving her the credit she deserves.
Beautiful. I mean, okay, great. All right. What do you got for me?
Okay, some ideas.
Okay.
So there's the famous story of the midwives.
Okay.
Pharaoh says to the midwives, you have to throw all the baby boys into the Nile and let just the girls live.
Right. This is the beginning of the first chapter of the books of Exodus.
Yes.
The beginning of the Passover story, basically. Okay,
yes.
great.
And I want to bring that because that's one of the pieces that she wrote from the beginning knew and put all of her, views in, as opposed to, just the questions, and then you have to go by the sources.
Got it. Okay.
So it definitely highlights a lot of her method and her outlook.
Great.
So it says in the Bible, it says the Hebrew midwives. Pharaoh is speaking to the Hebrew midwives.
Mm-hmm.
In Hebrew, it's hamiyaldot ha'ivriot. So it's ambiguous. Is this Egyptian midwives of the Jews, of the Hebrews? Or is it Hebrew midwives of the Hebrews?
Right. Wait, so let's make sure I understand, and we understand it. So it could be interpreted that Hebrew as the midwives of the Hebrews, which could be Egyptian midwives who are serving the Hebrews, or it could be the Hebrew midwives. Those are the two possibilities.
Right.
Okay, great.
So is he speaking to women who are Israelite, Hebrew, right? Or is he speaking to midwives who are Egyptian?
Great. So this is just so we can talk this through for people. This is an example where you're reading the text, you open Exodus, it's the first, chapter, and you read that section and you see Pharaoh is making this command of the midwives to kill the Jewish firstborn sons, the Jewish male sons, and her question is, were they Jewish midwives or not? That's what we have so far. Okay, great. That's what's bothering Nechama, or probably what was bothering Rashi also.
Right, and a lot of the commentators.
Yeah.
So the traditional view from the Midrashic, the rabbinics, and the medieval commentators, and even a lot of the modern commentators, was that of course these are Jewish, Israelite, but of course these are Jewish midwives, because who else is really going to be tending to the Jewish midwives? And eventually they stand up to Paro, they save the Jewish boys, they don't listen to Paro, they save even the girls and especially the boy babies, they don't throw them and kill them at birth. So the question is, the tradition, of course, Jews stand up for themselves, and of course, it was only Jewish midwives who were defending the Jewish people. But
that's
Nechama
the majority.
says
That's
the majority view.
Okay.
And Nechama takes from some of the minority opinions, and she says, not true. It just says, hamiyaldot ha'ivriot, the midwives who are of the Hebrews. So she says, I think that they're Egyptian. It's ambiguous because it also says that they feared God. Vatir'ena hamiyaldot et ha'elokim.
Sure.
These midwives feared God. So what do the traditional commentators say? For sure, they're Hebrew, they're Jewish. Nechama says no. The idea of fearing God, of having morals and ethics, she says, and she's right, because many times in the Bible, that phrase is not just used that you're specifically Jewish, but that you have morals and ethics. Abraham, when he goes down to Gerar among the Philistines, and something happens there, and he says, Sarah is really my sister. So the king Avimelech says, why did you say she's your sister? And he says, well, I didn't want to say she's my wife because I didn't think that there was Yirat Elokim, fear of heaven. And we don't expect Avimelech to be Jewish. He's not at that time. So the idea is this universal idea of morals and ethics.
Right. Which, awe of the heavens in some way.
Exactly.
Not fear of being punished necessarily, more like recognize there's something bigger than you, a general absolute moral code or something like that. Okay.
Exactly. So
we shouldn't assume that just because it says that about the midwives that means they're Jewish. It could mean it's anyone who actually distinguished themselves by being God-fearing in the context of a situation like that.
Right, that there's a universal moral and ethical code.
Okay.
And she wants to show, they stood up to Paro because they felt this moral and ethical push. In every generation, you have to have people who feel the morals and the ethics and will stand up for what's right. And in the end, she has this whole piece that during the Holocaust, right, we were disappointed that there wasn't this universal idea of morality and ethics. And there were only a handful of people, and we celebrate them as the righteous Gentiles. But really, that's what we expect from humanity. So she's taking this idea, an ambiguity in the text, and she's teaching this beautiful moral lesson from the language in the text, but using a little different spin that has been the classical view, because she wants to show that we have expectations of other people in the world, not just, that every group just cares about themselves. And if we had that, maybe the terrible things that happened in Germany would not have happened if we would have had more righteous Gentiles who believed in this universal moral and ethical code and didn't look at the other as the other. And we don't care about them.
All right, we have so much to say here. First of all, a small thing I wanted to point out, or not small, it's important, but I want to say two things. One is, inherent in what you just said was a reference to one of her methodologies, which was, looking at a phrase in a certain place and looking at and saying, well, what does it mean in other places? Which again, feels like one of those elements of showing up in the academic literary space, right? Where you might have people who are analyzing fiction that would use the same tools.
Right, so literary,
right.
That was
That's
very
a literary
much,
tool.
Yes.
She's saying, well, what does veterena, what does awe of God mean in the story of Abraham? It's about non-Jewish people who are God-fearing in morality. So I want to point that out. And then I just want to share, so it's very interesting this is what you chose to share here. So I have a piece that I've written or performed before that I share usually around Parshat Zachor, the time of year we think about memory and the Holocaust and those who have tried to kill us. And I also on Yom HaShoah, on the Day of Holocaust Remembrance, where I use the story of Shifra and Puah of the Midwives to talk about this idea of what does it mean to be God-fearing. And then I use examples of my grandfather's story from the Holocaust of different moments where people acted out of a sense of awe of God, a fear of God, starting certainly with Oskar Schindler, who saved my grandfather, who's an example of a righteous Gentile who made those choices in that moment. I also share stories that both his father and mother chose during the Holocaust to do that felt like moments where they were acting in awe of God or in fear of God. So first of all, it's crazy that that's the case, but now I'm going into my brain and saying, well, what seeded that outlook for me? And so for me, it's someone named Michael Hatton. I don't know if you know him. Okay, so he teaches at Pardes. He lives in Alon Shvut, the same place Yeshiva University we're talking about, and he has a book called Passages where he introduces this framework to think about how we think about the midwives, this idea of what does it mean in a time where the world has gone mad to act in a way where you're fearing God. So I always attribute that to him, and now I need to call him, when we finish this conversation, I gotta say, were you influenced by Nehama Leibowitz? Because it feels like
this is one of her most famous pieces.
Right. It's got to flow through there. And maybe in the piece he references her. I have to go back. It's been many years since I've looked at it inside, as they say. But I'm just I'm noticing I literally in this moment am realizing that one of my favorite Torahs and most powerful Torahs that is personal to me that I share literally traces back to the Torah of Nehama Leibowitz, and I had no idea that that's where we were going to go. So that's just talk about, first of all, a wink from Hashem, a wink from God, as they say. But second of all, that she's in the water. She's everywhere without even realizing. I'm swimming in Nehama Leibowitz's Torah. I've shared it, many times in many different instances, and I had no idea that it was coming from there. So that's crazy. Okay, wow.
Right, and that's what we see all the time.
Yeah. That
she's so influential.
Wow.
And that she influences to see these things, and we assume, of course, this is the way to look at it.
Right.
So you really see how successful she was.
Unbelievable. And you're right, and it raises your question of humility also, because usually when someone has that type of influence, they're very in your face about it. And you've said a couple of times, maybe you want to say a little bit more about it, you've referenced her as humble. What do you think's going on there? Is that was her personality? Was that strategic? Why, should she have done more so people knew she did the right thing? What do you...
She did the right thing because everyone saw that she was about the Torah, about the teaching. And her influence is so great because of that. And she influenced people to realize that they're owning the Torah, they're also learning from her, but that this is something great and unique, and it's about the Word of God, and it's not about me.
Wow.
And that really was such a potent message, and I think that also allowed so many other women to teach, because it wasn't a political statement. It was just about the material. Right. Let's spread Torah together.
Wow. Right, that's beautiful. This is not about me. It's not about my ego, me being famous, or me taking credit. This is about we're trying to get the Torah out there, and it's not just as simple as here's a Torah, let's get it out there. There's work that needs to be involved. There's rigor and effort. So we're going to put in the effort so that we can kind of move the conversation forward.
Yeah.
Wow. Beautiful. Do you want to say, you've said it a couple times, do you want to say a little bit around her being a woman? Do you want to say more about that? What is it, what's the significance of that, you think?
I think it's very significant because until her time, we didn't really have, women who were teaching Torah beyond, let's say, of course, the schools. And you have to realize, interesting, that the Sarah Schneer school started, this is the woman who started the Beis Yaakov movement in Eastern Europe. Interestingly, she was influenced by what she saw in Germany to bring it back east. Okay. But she starts in 1917. Nechama is learning around that same time. So we have, during this time period, the Beis Yaakov movement that's developing, that Sarah Schneer is developing teachers, women teachers, to go and teach. Okay. And we also have Nehama Leibowitz, who has a different kind, as we spoke, different kind of background, but the fact that she was such a rigorous teacher. And she is teaching teachers, so we have these two trajectories in the Jewish community, kind of parallel, very different, but influencing that the importance of having women who are learned, who are teaching others.
Wow, and just say one sentence on what Beis Yaakov is, in case people don't know.
Beis Yaakov is the all-girls, educational program where before Sarah Schneer was around, they didn't even teach girls in a formal setting.
Wow.
Jewish topics. They went to secular schools, but there were no Jewish schools for Jewish girls and young women. So that was revolutionary and really changed the scene for Orthodox Jewish girls learning. And so did Nechama in the more modern circles of Jewish women learning, but also teaching.
And would you say, I don't even know if the word feminist existed then, did Nechama's, we talked about her goals before, was like a piece of what she was trying to do shape the way women exist in the Torah world, or that felt like something that happened alongside it but was not really what she was focused on?
She was not focused on it. People tried to pull her in because remember, she's around 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and she was very adamant not to be pulled into it. She said, I'm teaching Torah, I am accepting the way the halacha is, the Jewish law is. I'm not trying to be revolutionary in any way. I am trying to teach Torah. And she had many opportunities, and people constantly confronted her and wanted to use her. And she constantly said, I am teaching Torah. That is my goal. And I think she was amazingly impactful because, again, as we said earlier, it's really part of her humility. It's really about the material.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that she didn't pick to teach topics about women necessarily.
Right. And what about students? Did she say, I want to have as many female students as possible to change the generations, or that wasn't part of the thing either?
I think it was, but she saw herself as a general teacher. But mostly her classes were for Jewish women.
They were.
Meaning once she got to the university, of course, she taught men and women. She had many male students.
Right.
Very successful.
Right. And I think also popular among both, we'll call them, it's very black and white terms, but religious and non-religious people as well, correct?
Yes. Her Gilyonot, her sheets, started going out also to yeshivas all over. People were starting to, answer her questions. But she was very careful about that because she wanted to stay really on message about the Torah, about learning. And that is very interesting. But her influence, of course, she was a role model.
Right.
Someone who was so learned. And by that, she influenced. And she has, real writings that were very serious, and that had a huge impact. So I would say that she still is the most influential woman in all of Torah learning.
Wow.
Till this very day. Of course, more women, and there'll be others, but still, if I had to pick someone, she really is the person that I would say had the most influence on just Torah learning for women.
Beautiful. All right, do you want to share another one with me? You have
yes.
more? All right.
Yes. So we have the moral dilemma when it says that God is going to harden Pharaoh's heart.
Oh my God, impossible.
Okay, right. You have the 10 plagues, and God says, okay, I'm going to do all the plagues, and I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So you have the big question of free will.
Yeah.
If God is hardening Pharaoh's heart, how is there free will? And how could he be punished for the actions if God is hardening his heart?
Right.
So she brings two very important textual ideas. Number one, she brings the idea that if you look very carefully at the text, remember, it always starts with the text for Nechama.
Sure. Yeah.
If you look at the text, you see that for the first 5 plagues, it says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart.
Okay.
But for the last 5 plagues, it says that God hardened his heart. Okay, what do you do with that?
God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Okay.
So what do you do with that?
Right.
So the Rambam, Maimonides, gives a whole speech, right? He writes many paragraphs about this idea. And he wants to demonstrate, and again, Nechama bringing a traditional view, right, in order to explain something. So before we said, we're showing how she shows untraditional views. Here she's showing a very traditional view, that how do we answer this big philosophical question? By one of the big philosophical greats that we have. And she brings in Maimonides, who says, well, this is the way the world works. How is human nature? That once you act in a certain way, it's very hard for you to turn back. So it's not that God had to influence Pharaoh every single decision he's making for plague 6 and on. It's just by saying no all the time, he got himself into a place where he couldn't say anything else. He just couldn't respond to anything else. And the only way to change his heart would be if God intervened, specially, almost like a miracle. Because what is human nature? Once you act in a certain way, it really gets you into a certain pattern. And that's the way the world works. And the Rambam, Maimonides, and also Nechama following Maimonides, was very much in that idea that your behavior and your habits and the way you act in certain situations already sets the stage for yourself. And that how you behave influences the outcome of your life. And sometimes if you behave in a certain way, of course everyone can do tshuva, which means everyone can ask forgiveness and everyone can change their ways and repent, of course. But many times you can't get to that because you're so stuck. So Nechama wanted to show, of course Pharaoh had free will. It can't be that the Torah would have a story that there is no free will. It's just the Torah is telling us that this is human nature.
The nature of free will. So I think what I hear you saying a little bit is, if you make the same mistake 5 times in a row, at a certain point, it's not a question for you anymore. That's just like part of your nature, because you've developed that habit where you're going to say no. And then it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart, but it means God created the world in a way in which, if you make the same mistake 5 times, it becomes the fabric of who you are. There's no opportunity to notice that you're even making that choice anymore.
Right. So Nechama was very interested in this idea. Also, she asks the question, why do we have so many commandments? Let's say Orthodox Judaism, and the Torah talks about so many commandments. And she brings in another great medieval, we don't know who it is exactly, but someone who wrote the Sefer HaChinuch, the Book of Education. He wrote it as a gift for his son on his 13th birthday, his bar mitzvah. We know it's one of the students of Ramban in the 13th century.
Nachmanides. Right?
Yes, Nachmanides.
And again, the Sefer HaChinuch is set up so that it's basically it's written by Parsha, correct? It's written by each Torah portion and like what the laws to learn from that portion. Okay.
Exactly. And he gives reasons and ideas, but the main point is she wants to bring in is that he says acharei ha'pu'ulot nimshachim halevavot. So we see that Nechama was a bit of a behaviorist, even though she believed, of course, that learning influences you, but you learn in order to influence your actions also, and actions count.
Great way to translate the phrase, though, you use. Sorry.
Yes. So your actions, right, inform your intentions.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay.
That if you act a certain way, then that will influence how you think. So this was very important for Nechama as a foundation stone for her educational, let's say, program, because she felt that in Israel during that time, it was after the Holocaust, a lot of ideas were floating around, and kids were saying, I don't want to do anything, I don't want to do any laws or any religious commandments until I understand everything. And I want to intellectually know, and then I will commit.
In a time of isms, right?
Yes,
in a time of isms, explain to me the whole thing, and then I'll decide if I want to do it. Okay. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So she said no. First, do the laws, learn about them simultaneously, but the more you're immersed in it, the more you learn, the more you're engaged, the more you do these mitzvot, the more you'll see how beautiful they are, because you have to be inside. You have to be committed. You have to be part of it. And she felt that that was very important for her generation. So yes, she gives a beautiful intellectual framework. And she thinks that's important.
Right.
But she feels that it can't be divorced from your actions. Be good to your neighbor. Be a caring person. Follow, the law. She wanted people to follow, the laws of the Torah as well, to be informed, but also to be part of the bigger Orthodox community. And that was very important for her. So she wanted her teaching not only to stay on an intellectual level, but to also be something that will inform their actual actions, and even to be committed before, let's say, you fully understand everything. Of course, there are always going to be questions, but she wanted to say that's okay.
Right. Wow. Okay, beautiful. This is my last question, and we're wrapping up here. I'll tie it together as follows. You're an educator. You're working at Stern for the undergraduates and the graduate students. You're bringing Torah to people. If there's one thing that you take with you into the classroom and the way you approach from Nehama Leibowitz, what is it? So
to meld intellectual rigor and to really look at the sources, to be engaged and to have opinions, I think that's very, very important. And I take that from Nehama Leibowitz, but I also want you to take lessons. And it has to inform your life. It has to be something that not only are you hearing about and you're learning intellectually, but that it really means something to you. And every day when you walk out of class, you were filled intellectually, spiritually, but also emotionally. I feel that that's important, and I felt that Nehama Leibowitz really wanted that for her students, and I saw that my father and mother also got that from their mentors, who really, one of them was Nehama Leibowitz. Wow. And I feel that that's a very important message, and that's why I felt such gratitude to her and wanted to teach a class about her. Beautiful. And speak about her.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right. So, first of all, again, the book, Nehama Leibowitz's book, you can see here, it's called New Studies or Studies in, and there's a whole series for each of the books of the Torah. And if you want to learn more from you, Professor Rosensweig, people should go to?
So, yutorah.org has a lot of my classes online, so you can listen to them.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. I really enjoyed it, and Nechama deserves this.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.